This is Land of Fabula, Psalm 56, verse 1. For the chief musician, to the tune of Silent Dove in Distant Lands, a poem by David when the Philistines seized him in Gath. Comment in verse 1, David wrote this poem to be sung to the tune of Silent Dove in Distant Lands, or it was to be recited to the background of that song. There's an example from ancient Syria of a written musical score. The notes are actually written, the musical notes, on clay tablets, which predates David by about 400 years. But that's a rare and perhaps unique example of written music until about 1,000 years later. Nothing from ancient Israel has survived, and whether any of the ancient Israelite music was ever annotated in the first place, we don't know. In verse 1, the Philistines seized David in Gath. David took refuge in Gath twice. The first time, he had just gone on the run from Saul and was by himself. The second time, he'd already been on the run from Saul for a few years, and he brought 600 men with him. The Philistines didn't harass him the second time, but the first time they arrested him and brought him to their king. David escaped harm by pretending to be insane. The king simply released him, so David escaped by the skin of his teeth and by the grace of God. It's recorded in 1 Samuel 21, 10-15. David was already famous for leading the armies of Israel against the Philistines, so it's no wonder the Philistines arrested him, and it's a marvel of God's grace they didn't kill him. So after that incident and other dangers from enemies, David writes, still in verse 1, Be merciful to me, God, for man wants to swallow me up. All day long he attacks and oppresses me. My enemies want to swallow me up all day long, for they are many who fight proudly against me. When I'm afraid, I'll put my trust in you. In God I praise His word. In God I put my trust. I will not be afraid. What can flesh do to me? All day long they twist my words. All their thoughts are against me for evil. They conspire and lurk, watching my steps. They're eager to take my life. Shall they escape by iniquity? In anger cast down the peoples, God. You count my wanderings. You put my tears into your container. Aren't they in your book? Then my enemy shall turn back in the day that I call. I know this, that God is for me. In God I'll praise His word. In Yahweh I'll praise His word. I've put my trust in God. I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? Your vows are on me, God. I'll give thank offerings to you. For you've delivered my soul from death and prevented my feet from falling, that I may walk before God in the light of the living. Comment, there's a repeating theme in verses 3, 4, and 11 that David will not be afraid. Quote, When I'm afraid, I'll put my trust in you. Then, in God I put my trust, I will not be afraid. Then, I've put my trust in God, I will not be afraid. Psalm 23 also comes to mind, I'll fear no evil, for you are with me. Fear and faith are opposites, so it makes sense that we shouldn't be afraid. In verse 7, David asks, Shall they escape by iniquity? In other words, will they get away with iniquity? And he asks God to prevent that. Quote, In anger cast down the peoples, God, meaning don't let them get away with it. In verse 8, You count my wanderings. You put my tears into your container. Aren't they in your book? The idea is that God keeps account of our trials to the end that He'll make it up to us, assuming we kept faith during the trials. It's similar to 2 Corinthians 4:17 that, quote, Momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison, end quote. Our afflictions here produce reward in the beyond. We can count on God that His payback to us will be most generous, far beyond all comparison to the relatively light and momentary trials that produce them. Verse 9 is memorable, quote, I know this, that God is for me. That's the consistent meaning of it across various translations. The English Standard Version and the New American Standard are identical here, quote, This I know, that God is for me. But that's assuming we're with Him, quote, Yahweh is with you while you're with Him, 1 Chronicles 15:2. In verse 12, Your vows are on me, God, I'll give thank offerings to you, end quote. The law of thank offerings is in Leviticus 7. Someone such as David might petition God for something such as protection from enemies, and along with the petition, vow to bring God an offering if He answers. So David's saying in verse 12, I made a vow to give you a thank offering when you answer. I'm just letting you know I haven't forgotten. When you come through, as I know you will, I'll come through with the thank offering. And the last line is positive as well. It's always fitting in our prayers to make the last line positive, declaring our faith that God will answer. Quote, "For you have delivered my soul from death and prevented my feet from falling, that I may walk before God in the light of the living." Psalm 57 is next.